Welcome to the Rick Fuller podcast, presented by Rick Fuller, the team leader of the #1 team in San Francisco, in the San Francisco Bay Area and Sac County for most recent sales, according to Zillow. Rick is a national real estate coach and community leader, and he has several offices in the Bay Area and Sac County, and he's continuing to grow. So congratulations, Rick. I'm Christina Morales. I'm a writer and a marketer, and Rick is my friend. We started talking about real estate investing, and I have questions, I have fears, and so Rick, we decided let's record these conversations. So while this is for me, hopefully a lot of people will also get all of the valuable information that you have to share, because I need to know, I want to know what you have to offer, and you've done this for years. So thank you for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us.
You're welcome, Christina. I've literally had the privilege of buying all various types of real estate, renting them, holding them, flipping them, commercial, residential, Airbnb, VRBO, and according to Zillow, we've helped about 1,000 people invest in real estate. And so I'm delighted to share. It's actually one of my favorite topics. I genuinely believe not owning real estate is hazardous to your wealth. Because if you think about what real estate does for people, we don't necessarily sell real estate. We really sell a financial picture. We really sell a retirement plan. We really sell kids' college education, because oftentimes that's the vehicle that they use to fund them and to fuel those investments and to be able to send their kids to college or retire. And they use real estate to do that, and that's how they've gained wealth. But we're not all about real estate. You know, you and I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago that was honestly the most popular podcast thus far we've ever done. Several people reached out to me after that podcast. Hey, can I get 15 minutes of your time to kind of talk about my situation? And we called it the 4 R's of a financial plan, the 4 R's. And it literally breaks down, and real estate is one of those R's, to kind of give that away. But it's not the only R. There's 3 others. And so we're also mindful that there's other ways to get there as well.
Well, today's topic is why this is the perfect storm for real estate investors. And we're going to discuss the macro picture. This is going to be an ongoing conversation we're going to have over the next few months. And so we're going to start out with the broad picture of why the way that people used to save money and have a secure financial future, it's not working anymore. Like the way our grandparents, our parents did it, it's just not going to work. There's a lot of us who are independent contractors, are entrepreneurs, and we don't have that 401k. We don't have those avenues of financial planning that people did in the past. And so we're going to talk about why real estate is a viable avenue to have a secure future. And you have daughters who are teenagers. I have daughters who are 8 and 10. We have college to pay for. We have weddings to pay for. And just thinking about it, it's far away, but boy, does it come fast. And I'm freaked out. So help me plan for these girls who want to go to college.
Well, let's start with this. You know, yesterday was Father's Day, and before this webinar, you know, you and I always jump on just a few minutes early and get our thoughts together and what we're going to talk about. And we talked about Father's Day and what Father's Day meant. And I was thinking yesterday about my grandfather, and I've had several amazing grandfathers in my life. One that's still living and still speaking into my life, and one that had passed away. And the one that passed away several years ago, prior to him passing away, I invited him over to my house. And it was kind of a unique opportunity. He needed in-home care, but not so much that it took a professional. I could just simply, bring his meals and help him from one area of the house to the other. And I took about 5 days off of work. And I just spent time with him, and I just asked him a million questions. And what was interesting about my grandfather, and his name was Ken. Ken could not remember what I fed him for breakfast, but he could remember the year he moved from the farm he could remember the year he bought his first car. He could remember the year he brought in his first TV. Like, he could not remember what we had for dinner. He couldn't remember what we did yesterday. But he had an impeccable memory. And I asked him this question. I said, Grandpa, if there was one thing that you would say in your lifetime has changed, what would you say that is? What's like the one thing? And it was interesting because if you think back, my grandfather at that age was probably in his 70s, I imagine, maybe a little later, yeah, he's probably in his 70s. And boy, a lot's changed. I mean, he grew up during the Great Depression, World War II. You think about all the things that have occurred, landing a man, putting a man on the moon, all of the things that have occurred over those many, many years. And you think about them, and the one thing that he said changed beyond any other was technology. That technology had changed. And I thought about it, of course, that makes sense. I mean, he literally had a horse and buggy growing up.
Wow.
And now today we have cars that drive, autonomous cars that drive themselves. In his days, there were no computers. And when we got our first computer, and you remember this, Christina, man, they were the size of a desk. You know, they were huge. Today, there's more computing power on this thing, my cell phone, than all of those computers combined. So these things have changed. And what was interesting is that you could see an old car and a new car. You could see an old phone and a new phone, and you could see kind of the change. But one of the things that changed that was hard to visually see was how people were creating wealth. It almost happened behind the scenes. It almost happened where people couldn't see it. It just wasn't visible, and it occurred. It's like an erosion of a hillside. We have a property that's on the Pacific Ocean, and there's a hillside there. And if you look at it over time, it's eroded, this hillside, over time. But you wouldn't notice it over the course of 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. You notice it after 30, 40, 50 years. And the way that people created financial wealth, the way that people retired, from my grandfather's age to my dad's age to my age, has changed tremendously. You know, you think about our grandfathers, and I'm making some assumptions here, and some people might say, well, that doesn't exactly apply to me. But I think if you kind of look at the general sense, the world, especially in the United States, the way that they created wealth, the way they retired was with a good old-fashioned pension plan. You know, my grandfather worked in a factory in Richmond and created shingles for homes. And at that time, he spent decades working there. The company was very loyal to him, and he was loyal to the company. And the result of that is the company provided him a pension plan combined with his Social Security, and he had a financial plan to sustain his life and create, you know, an income stream in his later years. Now, the pension plan, it's like one of those things that just eroded over time, and we began to see less of them. My dad or your dad or a parent, they didn't typically participate in a pension, but maybe like a 401k plan. So instead of being very dependent on the company and the company very dependent on the employee, there was this 401k. And in that case, there was kind of this interdependence, if you will. Like you would put some contribution in and the company would match it.
Right.
Or maybe a 401k, maybe a 403b, whatever you want. But there was some type of interdependence. I do some, you do some. Where the company, when my grandfather retired, it was simply I work and they provide for my pension. There was kind of a four, and that began to erode over time, kind of like that hillside. It just eroded over time and began to disappear in our society. And there were no headlines that described it disappearing. It just kind of subtly disappeared. You know, kind of like a mist that vapors. It's like a fog, early morning fog, and by the afternoon it was gone. And it was similar to that with the retirement plan, the pension, the Social Security plan. And, you know, companies at that point, I can't blame them. The world was becoming very global. And how can a Ford compete when they're paying for 3 employees and only 1 is working and 2 are retired, compared to other parts of our world where they're only paying for the one employee that's working. How can they compete in a global environment? How can their prices be competitive with that kind of labor cost? And so you can't really blame them for that. It just is the way the world has evolved. We're not trying to point blame to anyone. We're just simply saying the pension plan has become kind of a dinosaur outside of large factories, outside of large government institutions. In the private enterprise, in the private marketplace, certainly as independent contractors, it's all gone. That doesn't exist as a staple. Then you take, our generation, which is what you were talking about. I got 3 kids. Well, my oldest now is 18, a 16, and a 15-year-old. And, these 3 kids, they're growing up, and I don't have those pension plans. And because we're in our industry, Christina, more of an independent contractor, even that 401k is gone, right? And so the responsibility now is deeply on my shoulders. It's no longer dependent on Ford or General Electric or GM to provide that pension. It's no longer like what our parents might have enjoyed with a 401k or a 403b, kind of this interdependence. It is now very much independence, and you are responsible for your own financial picture. I'm responsible for my own financial picture. And if there's one thing I want people to get from this, is that we've got to go to work. Like, we've got to get busy on this. There is no pension or even government entity that's going to come in and provide every need that you have. And so you've got to get started. And the sooner you can get started, the more gradual the climb is. And the later in life that you begin to start thinking about these things, the steeper that hill, to the point where it feels like you're climbing a Mount Everest, or here in California, Half Dome. It's a really steep, arduous climb. But if we can start earlier, we can make that far more gradual. And I would implore you to think about how that has changed generationally, to say, we need to get working on it. It is very much up to me. What it is to be, it is up to me today. It's up to what we are going to do in our life to provide that financial health and financial well-being, and even that retirement later on in the future.
I think what you said that was really important is we need to change our thinking. And even if you look back to Leave It to Beaver, I mean, Beav had he had church shoes and he had school shoes. He had one outfit per day of the week. And that's not how we live anymore, because now we have my kids probably have 10, 15 pairs of shoes conservatively. We have Amazon, we have instant satisfaction, we have social media, we're comparing ourselves with the Joneses. And now when our ancestors, when our grandparents, they lived through the Depression, they knew what it was like to not have a meal. And now we can drive to In-N-Out and there you go. And so now we have to change that way of thinking of, we can't just spend all of our disposable income. We need to invest it. Like Joe said in a previous webinar, where are you planting your seeds? Because that's where we're going to grow the harvest. If we're planting it in shoes, vacations, things that we don't have or we don't need, then we won't have later on. And so this is not just investing in real estate, it's changing our complete financial mindset to prepare for our future. I was recently talking to one of my friends, and we're around the same age, her mid-40s, and her parents have nothing. And now her dad has dementia, and he doesn't recognize the mom, and they're trying to figure out, where do we put her? And, and my friend has children and she has college age kids. And so how do you juggle this? And so we need to avoid that stress in the future. So I'm so glad we're addressing this.
Well, Christina, the reason I want to address it is because we get into this default pattern. I think a great way to parallel it would be parenting, right? Like, in absence of learning something new, we often parent, whether we like to or not, the way that our parents parent, right? We talked about kids early, and we both have kids, and I would catch myself saying something my dad had said to me or my mom had said to me, right? And the default setting, and the same thing parallels over to finances, is that the default setting can be, I'm just waiting for the pension to show up, or I'm just waiting for Social Security, or I'm just waiting for the employer to contribute their share in my 401k or 403b. And what I'm saying is that in parenting, we can parallel, and many of those things were applicable, and they still work today. But with finances, that's eroded. That's gone. You know, if you're sitting back and thinking, okay, it's now I'm in my 50s, and let me start thinking about what retirement looks like. How did my parents retire? And that becomes your default setting, and you don't have the options that they have.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have the solutions that they had. If you're thinking about your 401k and you haven't been contributing, or you don't have one in your company, and that option doesn't exist. And that's what makes this so scary, is that our default setting is, well, think about it, when I get to my 40s and 50s, the hill's really, really steep, and I don't have the products, I don't have the vehicle that they had to get there. So you got to start doing things different. We got to move from a dependency on the employer.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to move away from even the interdependency, meaning that they're contributing, I'm contributing, and together we're all contributing, to it's time to get serious. It's time to take this serious. It's time to start thinking about my investing future and the things that I need to do and get started. Now, you and I, we talk a ton about the hows and the what we're doing, and when to do it and where to invest. And you and I talk a lot about that. We'll do tons of webinars. We do one of these webinars or podcasts weekly. And I'll get into all those details, every one of them. But you have to have a sense of urgency to get started. It's not enough to say, yeah, one day I'm going to do that stuff. One day I'm going to invest in real estate. One day I'm going to start investing in my future. One day I'm going to create revenue. One day I'm going to have some reserves. One day I'm going to contribute to my retirement. It is not enough to say one day. My hope today is that you're hearing this and saying, the vehicle has changed. If it is to be, it's up to me, and it's time to go to work, and it's time to start learning. I'll never forget, I was listening to some guys that have really been kind of a modern mentor to me. And they have a radio show, and they call it The Real Estate Guys. And it's funny because on this show, it's a son, it's a father, and it's a grandfather.
Wow.
And a guy calls in on this show and asks the question, if you had $5,000, where would you invest it? Now, Christina, I was driving when I'm listening to this podcast, and I'm listening to these guys, and it was almost as if I could see every listener like lean in and listen, like they were waiting for the answer. Their ear perked. They're like attentive. They were attuned to what was going to be spoken. And the son said, "Grandpa, why don't you cover that?" And so I was like, okay, we're getting some real wisdom here, right? Yeah. Like this is where we're getting the truth. And Grandpa said something at that point on this show that I will never forget. And he said, if I had $5,000 to invest in real estate, I'd spend it on my education.
Really?
Now, if you think about what we're doing, like we are investing in the education of others when it comes to real estate investing. And a very big part, when you listen to a Dave Ramsey or a T. Harv Eker or many of the, it starts in your head. Like you've got to begin to think a million before you become a millionaire. I mean, there's a very natural sense that you cannot think the same way and accomplish the same results. So a person thinks, so they become.
Right.
What we're saying is that these podcasts are about really changing the way that you think. And the default vehicle that your grandparents used or your parents used doesn't exist today to get you there. And you're going to have to do things different. And you're going to have to take more of that role yourself to say, now is the time to begin to learn and grow my real estate education, my investment education, so that in the future, I don't look back and say, I wish I would have. I'm now saying, I'm glad I did.
Mm-hmm. And also, you're saying, you can't rely on a business to help you. You also can't rely on the government right
Right.
now, with all of these payouts and the craziness in the world. Like, Social Security has been in peril for decades, and I'm sure by time in 20 years when we're ready to retire, I don't know if that will be there either. And if it is, it'll be minimal at best. And so you can't rely on a plan B either.
Whether it is there or whether it isn't there, I don't want to plan for it regardless.
Yeah, right.
Because I don't want to base my life on that. I don't want to base our family on that. And you're right, Christina, the government in some sense doesn't create anything. They don't add a service or a product to the marketplace. And they operate through taxpayers. That's their funding, that's their revenue source. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you're paying more out, logically, you're going to have to receive more in, which would come in the form of taxes and go through the taxpayers. And so all the more reason to get serious and to take personal responsibility for your financial plan.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're going to be talking about. Christine, let's go to the first slide. And I just want to kind of walk through this a little bit before we get into some of the how to do this. And so we're talking about, why we're in the perfect storm for real estate investing and why real estate is a very, very good choice to accomplish this goal. And one of the reasons why is really related to the average savings account. Now, this is a CNBC article that we're looking at. If you're listening to the podcast, I'll try to do my best to describe it. But it's a image based on age group, and that gives younger, 35 and younger, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, 55 to 64, 65 to 74, and 75 and older. And what we're looking at is the average household savings account. Like, how much is in that average U.S. American savings account?
Mm-hmm.
In some sense, this is probably your neighbors, right? This is probably the people that go to your gym. They're at the PTA. They're just people in your community, all different ages. We've also broke it down here. Singles, couples, couples with children. So you can kind of get an idea. What I want to articulate and what I want you to understand is that the average American household has very little money in their savings account. According to this study, the average household, which takes into account all various ages, has $8,863 tucked away in a savings account. Now, this is accumulation of all their savings accounts. This is not just one savings. This is all their savings account. And what we know is that if you only have $8,863 tucked away in savings, and you live hypothetically where we live, Christina, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area, how long does that last without an income source? Mm-hmm. How long does $8,863, last in your home or in my home or in our neighbor's home? It doesn't last very long. Maybe somebody get through a month, maybe 2 months if they really, maybe 3 months, and then it's exhausted. And so we don't even have enough money to cover, more than 3 to 4 months worth of expenses in our savings account as Americans. And so something's got to change. Something's got to give. This cannot be the option. You can't save your way there. Americans have tried. It doesn't work. You've got to invest. And let me take it to the next slide, Christina. And one of the ways that people invest is in real estate. So now we start looking at the net worth. Now, net worth, for those that are kind of familiar with that term, it's your assets minus your liabilities equals your net worth. And we're looking now, because I'm talking to you about your financial future, we're looking at those that are 65 and older. And this is a study from the Joint Center of Housing Studies at Harvard University. And they compared and contrasted homeowners and where they're at age 65 and older, and renters. And they said that the average renter had a net worth of $6,710.
Wow.
$6,710. And we see it was very similar to what was in their savings account, right? We looked at the average savings account was $8,863. But the average homeowner had over $319,200. So over $319,000 of net worth. And of that, well, nearly 50% of it was in home equity. That's $143,500. And so is a renter bad? No, I've rented places before many times. Nothing wrong with renting a place. You just don't want to do that forever.
Right.
It's very difficult to get ahead by just savings. Not owning real estate is hazardous to your wealth. And we see that the average homeowner has 44 times greater wealth than a renter, than those that are renting. Now, I want to just provide a couple of disclaimers here, that there's, again, nothing wrong with renting. Renters aren't bad, renters aren't evil, and there's certainly times and places to rent a home. I remember one time my wife Jennifer and I were transitioning from one home to the next, and we rented a home for a year. Like, that made sense. Looking back on it, I wouldn't have traded it. It gave us the ability to look for the right home and be able to move when we saw the right property and so forth. I remember before we were married, we rented a property. Like, that made sense at that point in time. But you can't stay there.
Right.
And those that own real estate have 44 times greater wealth than those that are renting real estate. And people have said this for years. Well, when you're renting, you're paying somebody else's mortgage. Home, you're paying your own mortgage. And that's absolutely the case. And this is based on a study of those that are 65 and older, again, by the Joint Center of Housing Studies at Harvard.
And this makes sense because when COVID first started, and it wasn't even a month, and people were completely panicked, and that's why we had the surplus funds come into our accounts. But that shouldn't have been the case. People couldn't even survive 1 month without income. And so, I mean, obviously these numbers are true because there was such panic, and now we're in month 3, and people are panicked still, and now things are opening slowly. But this is so important to know, so that way we can have reserves for when life happens.
And Christina, you and I, we did a talk, maybe a month ago, less than a month ago. And we looked at, during COVID-19, during shelter in place, we looked at the stock market, and we saw how impacted the stock market was. It dropped significantly. Some cases over 30%. We looked at unemployment. Unemployment had gone from around the 4% range to, at that point, it was like 12%. And we saw these massive charts. If you think about this, if you're listening to the podcast, you can imagine a chart that just jumps or declines rapidly, and you can kind of see that. When we looked at real estate, we noticed that the average home in 5 markets that we studied was worth more. The median price was higher after shelter in place than it was before. That the real estate values climbed. They'd say, Rick, sales dropped. They did. There were less sales. That is very true. We're talking about is median price. The median price of these properties have risen. And you can see here by this example, those that held real estate gained greater equity over a period of time. One of the things I love about real estate, we'll talk about this in just a moment, is that not only does real estate often go up in value, but if you buy it right, and we'll talk to you about how to do that on a future podcast. If you buy it right, one of the amazing things that happen is as you're making your payment, you're paying down the principal balance. In addition, you're saving money on taxes. So as values of real estate historically have gone up, you are paying into the property, paying the principal balance of the loan down. That gap between the two is creating equity.
Yeah, that's what I'm excited to hear. because I want to know how to do it. Like, I know it's the right thing to do. I don't know how to do it. So that's a topic I'm super excited to talk to you about.
Yeah, and you are, Christine, I know you're posting all these topics on Investor Thrive. So somebody who's like, I want to learn more. Today is really entry level. I'm trying to create a sense of urgency for you to say, look, don't leave it up to your employer. Don't leave it up to the government. If it is to be, it's up to me. It's time to figure out how to do this. Because that, I think, has to come first before the why has to be clear. It has to resonate with you before you're ever willing to do the hard work to do the how. Like, we've got to clearly articulate why this is important and why continuing to learn and grow in this area is imperative, and to not give up. And when every worthy goal that I've ever obtained started off with obstacles, started off with frustrations. First time I started exercising, I was sore. I did it for more than a couple of weeks and I'm injured, and I have to recover from that injury. The question is whether I'm going to get back on the bike, whether I'm going to pick up and start running again or swimming again. Like, we just got to keep going. We got to know why we're doing it and stay the course. And if we know why, then the how is just a matter of time. Then it's just a matter of learning those things and beginning to apply what we'll teach in future calls.
And it's hard to change your mindset, because growing up, I always heard that it was risky. Real estate's risky. Your renters are risky. And so now I'm also trying to change that part of what I've learned growing up. And we've talked about this before, about buying the right properties attracts the right renters. And so we'll talk about that later, but it's a whole change of my mindset.
Well, it is. And it is risky if you don't buy it right.
Yeah.
You know, if you buy the wrong property, and I like to give this example. You buy a 4,000 square foot home because it's something that you would like to live in. It's got a couple of air conditioners. It's got 3,500 square feet of carpet throughout. It's got a huge pool in the back, and it's a beautiful, gorgeous home. Well, there's a couple of things that happen. One, as a landlord, you're taking on liability, aren't you? Somebody's got to maintain the pool. Somebody's got to manage the large lot. You're taking on risk. If the air conditioner goes out, you have double the responsibility with two of them. If the carpet is damaged with a tenant that you move into the property, you got a lot of square feet of carpet to replace. But if you bought it right and you began with the end in mind, like you're buying it in such a way that it's specifically designed for the right tenant and to create multiple tenant opportunities, then you can select the best tenant based on their financial qualifications. And part of the problem happens when we try to rent a property as a buy and hold option. We'll talk about buy and flip at another time, but you try to hold a property, a particular property, that's not a good rental property. It's very difficult to rent, and you take on incredible liability, and we wonder why it doesn't work. But if you buy the right property, and we have multiple applicants, and we limit our liability, we limit our risk, we limit our exposure, instead of having 3,500 square feet of carpet to replace if it's damaged after a tenant visits the home, or 4,000 square feet to paint, maybe I have a 1,500 square foot home. And you know, the interesting thing in our area, if I look at a 1,500 square foot home, on average, I get about $1.30 a square foot for rent. But if I look at a 4,000 square foot home, I'd often get 80, 85 cents a square foot. So a lot of those are very true. Real estate, there can be risks. So we look to mitigate the risk. We look to minimize the risk, and we look to position where you have less liability and less risk associated with owning real estate. And when you do that, you begin to see that there are solutions that exist to a lot of these challenges that landlords are facing.
Awesome, because I'm a cautious and feared person. So I know a lot of other people are having the same thoughts I am. So
Well, absolutely. And one of the reasons, and let's go to the next slide. And if you're listening to this, I'll try to articulate it. What I'm looking at is how home values have changed. And I love real estate. I own real estate. I buy my own product. We have a real estate brokerage. You mentioned, Christina, we have multiple offices. We have an amazing real estate team. And one of the reasons why I like real estate is that it is limited. Christina and I, we live about an hour and 15 minutes from San Francisco. And there are no buildable lots in San Francisco. It's 100% built out. So as demand continues to rise for the geographic area of San Francisco, that peninsula, what happens to home values is that demand continues to rise. There is a limit on the number of properties available, and prices continue to go up. Now, we're actually not talking about the structure. It's really the land. If you think about it, the actual structure or the house itself, it actually goes down in value. Think about a house, over time, the things wear out. Things need to be replaced. It's not a new home anymore. Carpet has some stain. Tiles have some cracks. It's just part of living in any home. Like, those things actually go down in value. If you had a dishwasher in your house, and when you first bought it, you might have spent $500, $600, $700, maybe $1,000 on a great dishwasher, right? Maybe even more. You sell it 10 years later, you're not selling it for $1,000. Probably selling it for $150 or even less. Right. So those things go down in value. So what goes up in value? It's the land. The land in real estate is what goes up in value. That's what you want to own. You want to own the land. So a lot of people tell me, Rick, I want to buy real estate, but I'm gonna buy a mobile home and I'm gonna go put it on an apartment. That's not doing it. It's not doing it. You're not owning real estate by doing that, because you're not owning an appreciable asset. That mobile home, that manufactured home goes down in value. It's the land that goes up in value. And so we're looking at just kind of gives us an idea of where home values have gone. And we've got a chart here that goes back to 1953. And I chose that date for a reason. The reason I chose that date is because my grandfather that told me a story about a property in Concord, and it must have been in the 50s. It could have been in the late 40s, but it was in the 50s. And my grandfather told me that this property, which is in Concord, California, had an open house. And he walked through the open house, and they wanted an astronomical $5,000 for the property. And he left and he said, there'll never be a home in Concord that sells for more than $5,000.
That's not even property tax.
And in 1953, we're looking at a chart, and the average home value was about $20,000. And this is median home prices throughout the United States. And we've also given you a chart based on inflation. And he said the home will never be worth more in Concord, California than $5,000. And today I teased them and said, you should have bought the whole block. Because you couldn't find a home now on that street. You could not find one under $500,000. And is it because the structure is in better condition? Is it because of the appliances are worth more? No, it's because of that land. It's all because of what we call supply and demand. As I've studied real estate now for the last 15, 16 years, the most powerful contributor to real estate is supply and demand. And real estate has a limited supply. There's only so much dirt in a given area. That's why I use the example of San Francisco. There's no more available buildable lots. You have to tear something down to build it. Therefore, there is a very limited supply. And as the demand continues, it causes the values to go up. As of the time of this recording, the median home value in San Francisco is right around $1.2 million, median home value. And by the way, that doesn't just impact the home values. The median rent Actually, let me rephrase that. The entry-level rent for San Francisco is about $3,200 a month. So it doesn't just change your home value, it also changed the rental rate. And even if you're an investor, the rental income. And it's because of this law of supply and demand. And we look at this chart that we provided you. If I follow the blue line, which is median home price, starting in 1953, you can see that it's a cyclical market. It goes up and down, but over a long period of time, going all the way to, and we kind of concluded at the end of 2019, and you can see that it's just simply across America gone up in value. And a big part of that is because of the value of the land. The land has gone up. And so we believe that not owning real estate is really hazardous to your wealth. That to create, if you're going to create that sense of urgency, you're like, okay, Rick, I get it. I can't do it the way my grandfather did it, my grandparents. I can't do it the way my parents did it. Like, the world has changed. It's no longer dependence or interdependence. Like, I am now it is independence on me to move forward and begin to go to work and provide for our financial future. Then you would see that real estate is a key component of that plan. A key component. And we really believe that there's 5 reasons why. There's really 5 reasons why. The first one we're looking at right here, and it's appreciation. The fact that over time, real estate in general has gone up in value. Now, that's not always the case. If you look back in 2006, you'll see on our chart here that the real estate values began to drop, hit kind of a record low at about 2013, 2014. And then it began to climb back up from there. If you're in the Bay Area, that chart really kind of starts, in my opinion, about 2005. We hit a peak, and then it dropped all the way to about 2010. One of the cities that we track regularly is the city of Antioch. 2005, the average home value in Antioch was nearly $550,000. And in 2009, the average home value was $178,000. I remember tracking this manually to see where the market was going. And today, the average home value is right back up to about $500,000 in the city of Antioch. And I share that because over time, real estate has gone up in value. And it's why real estate is often considered, Christina, a long-term investment. This is not a get-rich-quick scheme. This is not, I'm going to buy it for a month and then sell it. This is not, I'm a day trader in real estate. This is, I'm a real estate investor and I'm going to spend my life investing in real estate. And as you begin to kind of grasp that, you really find that when you buy and flip properties, in some sense, it's like tips. When you buy and hold property, it's when real wealth is accumulated. Because really the true wealth of real estate is owning it free and clear, not with all this leveraged debt. And we talk a lot about that in future podcasts. It's not about what most people have taught about real estate, like go and leverage. The moment it has equity, suck it out and go buy another one. That leads to financial devastation. What we want to encourage you is to own real estate and then own it paid for free and clear. What would it look like, Christina, if you bought a home and then you didn't have a mortgage payment? Like, what things could you fund and fuel in your life as a result of that? I would guess that there's a lot of things. What if you own more than one home and you owned them free and clear, right? And you didn't, if the mortgage payment didn't go to the bank, but in some sense that went to you or your savings account or to your family to provide for the expenses of your home, you could begin to very quickly see how you can create passive income through real estate.
This is good. I was watching, I love HGTV. I'm an HGTV junkie, and I was watching like Flipping 101, and they're saying the opposite of what you're saying, but they're messing up. And a lot of people have that additional stress. So it's good hearing real life as opposed to, a 30-minute show that's going to have ups and downs, and it's drama because it's TV. So it's so good to hear truth and someone who's in the business and making it work.
I've helped nearly 1,000 people do this.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been participating in this for as long as I can remember. And what I have found is that those that just suck the equity out of their property and go buy another one, that's the model they teach. And it's honestly, it's one of the dominant models. At the end of the day, they have a lot of debt, they have a lot of stress, and really, they don't own the real estate, the bank owns it.
Good point.
And you say, well, how can that be, Rick? Well, because the moment they don't make the payment, the bank will then foreclose on the property. And last time I checked, 100% of the foreclosures occurred with a bank mortgage on it. So if you want to avoid that, work to pay it off free and clear. Own the property without a mortgage. Now, can you do that immediately? Nope, it's going to take time. You know, are there strategies that can help you expedite it by like making additional principal contributions? You bet. Are there ways that you can use a calculator to kind of figure out how to pay it off in 10 years or 8 years or 6 years? I'll show you all those. We've got all those tools. Can you go with a 15-year mortgage so much of the loan is going towards principal and very little is going towards interest, so you're expediting this? You bet. But the idea of just taking every penny of equity out of the property and just going and buying more real estate is a very dangerous strategy. There was an article written here recently in the local newspaper about a lady that was doing that strategy during COVID-19, and she would buy a vacation rental home, and she would buy the property, and the moment she bought it and gained just a little bit of equity, she would pull out the equity out of the home and she'd buy another vacation home. She was doing great. I mean, the income was paying for the property. She was making all of the necessary payments for the property. But then with COVID-19 and shelter in place, tourism ceased. It dried up in its entirety. Matter of fact, up till recently, there was health orders that prevented you from having a short-term rental. And she was at risk of losing everything that she had accumulated as a result of that strategy. Those that we had educated for years about how to buy real estate, own it free and clear, pay it off, it was certainly an impact to not be able to rent the home. But they never risked losing the property in foreclosure. And so what we want to teach is not just how to own real estate, just title. That means you're responsible for fences and toilets and leaky faucets. What I want to teach is how to create wealth by owning real estate, which means you own it free and clear. And here I'm going to be convinced that when you step on the grass and you own the house free and clear without a mortgage, the grass feels a little different between your toes. It just, when you walk into that home, it feels a little bit different. And so there's several reasons why real estate is one of the great vehicles to help you reach that financial freedom. And one of them is the incredible tax benefits that real estate provides. I cannot think of another investment vehicle that has the assortment of tax benefits like owning real estate does. If you bought a home and you lived in it as your primary residence in the United States, and you lived there for 2 of the past 5 years, you have one of the greatest exclusions, which is called a capital gains tax exclusion. And each person, each that's on title, has $250,000 of capital gains tax exclusion. If you're married, obviously that's 2. That's $500,000 of capital gains tax exclusion. What does that mean? Well, the home value, you know, we looked at the last chart how it's gone up in value, and what we're saying is that you don't have to pay taxes, capital gains taxes, on that gain, on that growth of that home value and the equity that you've accumulated on the capital gain, up to $250,000 if you've lived in the home 2 of the past 5 years. Christina, can you think of another investment vehicle that gives you that opportunity? Because I can't. I can't think of, now this has got to be your primary residence, and we'll get into what to do on investment property, but I can't think of another financial vehicle that allows you to be able to have that kind of tax benefit by owning real estate. Another one that we look at is what's called a 1031 exchange. This is another major tax benefit. Now, this one is for investment property. You know, the capital gains tax, which is also known as IRS Code 121, that capital gains tax exclusion, that's for primary residence. That's not for an investment property. It's primarily for the primary residence. But the 1031 exchange is not for primary residence, for investment property. And it's the idea is that we can exchange, we can do a 1031 exchange, and we can take the capital gains and I can move it over another property, and now I can have a tax deferment. Like I can move those capital gains tax from one home to the next. Now it's got to be income producing. It's designed to be like for like, meaning rental for rental, but it doesn't necessarily have to be single family home. It could be single family to commercial property. It could be any number of things. But you're able to take the gain that you have in an investment property and move into another investment property. Let's say you have a couple of houses and you now want to own an apartment building. Sell those houses, do a 1031 exchange, avoid paying taxes, and move it into an apartment building or a commercial income producing property, right? And so this becomes an amazing tax benefit associated with owning real estate that most investments don't allow.
Your monopoly game just got super complicated on me.
Let me make it easier. Christina, let's say, you know, we talked about the 401k, right?
Yeah.
Like you got a 401k, you've been contributing things, there's tax advantages to the 401k.
Right.
And, you know, let's say that you're I don't know, you're investing in a certain stock. And you say, I don't want to have that stock anymore, but I want to have that stock.
Right.
And you could sell that stock within the 401k and you could move it to another stock, right? And you, if you kept it in the 401k, you're not paying taxes, right? It's still kept within the 401k.
Right,
You just have, that's what you're doing with the 1031 exchange. You're simply moving your real estate pieces around within the investment vehicle. You're not taking any cash out. You're simply moving those pieces around, much like those stocks that you sold and bought. You're buying and selling real estate. You're not exchanging them like, hey, you got a house, I got a house. It's not a trade. It's not a barter. It's I'm going to take the capital gains that I have on one home, and I'm going to move it to another property. And I'm going to defer. Now I don't have to pay those taxes until I sell that home. And if I do another 1031 exchange, until I, on and on and on and on. And real estate gives you that ability. So whether it's your primary residence and you have, if you're married, up to $500,000 of capital gains exclusion, because that's the home you live in, or it's an investment property and we're deferring those using a 1031 capital gains tax deferment, there are incredible incentives when it comes to the capital gains tax, right? And that real estate can provide that honestly most other investment vehicles can't come close to. I go and I buy a stock and it gains value and I sell it and there's a capital gain, I pay taxes on it.
Right.
With real estate, I can have it tax-free or even tax deferred.
Would I need like a specialized tax professional to help me with these issues, or a financial planner, or would my regular CPA know all of this so that way like they can guide me through this?
These are pretty fundamental, and meaning that most CPAs are very knowledgeable when it comes to the capital gains tax exclusion. Most title companies can speak intelligent. And you should speak to a tax professional. There's lots of little adjustments and limitations and so forth that you ought to run by your local tax professional. I'm giving you the overview. Now, with the 1031 exchange, remember that's like selling a stock and then buying another within your 401k, so you don't have to pay taxes, and you're just moving your real estate pieces or your real estate holding from one property to the next. That when we partner up with a 1031 exchange professional, when you're ready to do that, and that enables you to kind of make sure that the I's are dotted and T's are crossed on that. But the bottom line of it is that we're able to take the gain that you have in one property, and we're able to take it and put it into another property, enabling you to move some pieces around and eventually buy better property, more income producing properties that produce greater income and have less liability.
Okay. That's great. And next, we have like 6 minutes left.
I know, and we're moving pretty quick here. So let's talk about the mortgage and property tax deduction. One of the significant benefits to owning real estate is the deductibility, the ability to deduct from your income your mortgage interest. Now, I would tell you that most families, especially in the Bay Area, my guess is their mortgage payment is their largest payment. Maybe that in healthcare, but it's certainly up there, either their mortgage or their rent. And if you have a mortgage, the interest portion, not the principal portion, but the interest portion is tax deductible. If you think about it, that saves homeowners thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of taxable income. Now, in the Bay Area, property taxes are also pretty high. You can't write off all the assessments, but you can write off the property tax. So the property tax is deductible. So now we have the mortgage interest and our property taxes are deductible, reducing our income. So not only are we buying either our primary residence and using the capital gains tax-free, or we're using as an investment property the 1031 exchange. But now as we're paying these mortgage payments and our property taxes, we're writing them off, reducing our taxable income. So we're paying less money in taxes. We're keeping more of our own money in our account, enabling to do what we set out to do in the first place, which was start to take this seriously on investing in our future and our financial plan. The next one, you can depreciate a property. And we won't get into all the details on this, but the depreciation is really significant on real estate. You know, when you think about a house, we talked about this earlier, you know, you would think that the land does not depreciate. What do you mean by depreciate? Well, but and that's right, the land does not depreciate, but the structure, you know, on that does depreciate. Means it goes down in value. Over time, you'll have to make repairs to it. That makes sense. And if you hold it from an investment perspective, that's what's necessary on the depreciation. It's got to be an investment. When you own it from an investment perspective, you're able to write off the structure. So I don't know, you own a $500,000 house, $250,000 is land, $250,000 is a house. I can write off that house over a series of years, taking an additional tax deduction because it's an investment property. So how does that work? Well, let me parallel this to a work vehicle. In construction, it would not be uncommon to go out and buy a work vehicle. And I would be able to depreciate that work vehicle, meaning I could spread it out over several years. I could have a scheduled depreciation. Every year it goes down in value X number of dollars. And I could do that. We would understand that if I used a truck or a piece of equipment. And when it comes to real estate, a lot of people don't understand how it works. Well, it's very, very similar. It's an investment. It's for business-related purposes. That's why you own that investment real estate. And now I can take that structure and I can write it off. And if I own it as if it's a single-family home, or I can write it off over 27 years. So for the next 27 years, I can take a little piece. 27 and a half years, I could take a little piece of that property. And if it's commercial, I can write it off over 39 years. So I can just take a little piece and write it off every year, thus continuing to reduce my income, meaning that I can keep more of my own money and pay less legitimate taxes on it. And the last one is you could write off some of the repairs on investment properties. We need to make some repairs. Many repairs on an investment property you can write them off. Now, if you went and you bought a can of paint to paint your own house, it's unlikely that you would be able to write that off. Like, that's just part of being a homeowner. That's your primary residence. That's where you live. You know, the kids put their greasy hands on the wall. You got to paint it. That's part of the deal. But with investment property, you're able to take these repairs that you've done, and many of these repairs can be written off, thus continuing this process, whether it's mortgage interest, whether it's property tax, whether it's depreciation, or just the repairs that you're doing on the home. And we're able to take these and use them to reduce your taxable income, thus reducing the amount of taxes that you pay, giving us more available funds for us to invest in real estate. So, boy, I've shared a tremendous amount. I hope people's heads aren't spinning after this discussion. What we want you to come away with is really simple. The world has changed. This is a perfect time in our generation, a perfect storm to own real estate. And you own real estate because, number one, it tends to go up in value. It's income producing, and the tax benefits associated with real estate are unlike any other investment vehicle I know. And because of this, consider investing in real estate, because not owning real estate is hazardous to your wealth.
That has been so helpful, but now I have more questions that I am so excited to ask you. So, I mean, good thing we have 3 months worth of podcasts planned, because obviously this is complicated, but it's worth the investment. Like you said, we have to get our mindset right. And so stay tuned. I have a lot of questions to ask you. Our next podcast, our live webinar, and then I'll upload it as a podcast, is going to be how to become a real estate investor. And our live version will be this Friday at 2. So you can register at agentsthrive.com or Investors Thrive. And that's also where we'll put these graphs that Rick referred to, if you'd like to check those out. Other resources and tools will also be there. You can see this video, and you can go to Rick Fuller Podcast to hear other episodes. So thank you, Rick. I'll see you Friday, and everyone have a great day. Goodbye.
Thanks, Christina.
Thank you.